Good morning, Moray Rabotai. We're continuing on Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim. We started Siman Nun Zayin, the halachot of Baruchu. We mentioned how the Shliach Tzibur says Baruchu, everyone answers after him, and the Shliach Tzibur answers after that. The halachot of having a minyan for that, and a person that comes in the middle, all of those we discussed. Now Maran really references back to something that we learned in Siman Nun Dalet. If you remember, we discussed over there in Seif Gimel that some communities had a minhag that in the middle of tefillah, after Ishtabach, before the Kaddish, they would make public announcements, and that was something that was done in some communities for Sorech Sibur. And the exact language of that was the Ramah bringing Mizeh nitmashed ma shena'agu beharbe mekomot levarech chole or likvor bebet haknesset she'aseh lo din. This is between Ishtabach and Kaddish. Now Maran actually very strongly rejects something similar to that after Baruchu. In other words, even if you have a minhag after Ishtabach, you could do it, but after you said Kaddish and Baruchu, you already have started the process of Rikot Kriyat Shema, and absolutely there's no heter for stopping, even for Sorchet Tzibur. So therefore, says Maran, Makom shenagu lisok al chaverehem ben Kaddish u'Baruchu liyotzer or. Places that they have this minhag that if somebody has a public complaint against his friend and he wants to have the community enforce it, and therefore he comes in the middle of Shaharit and starts saying, Reuben stole money from me and we have to take action and so on, or any other so-called public need, Ledaber b'sorchei rabim to'im hem. Maran says this is a mistake. It has to be nullified, this minhag. It is not a correct minhag, therefore it should not be done. Now, why is that? Says the Mishna Berurah, once you say Kaddish, once you say Baruchu, it's as though you started already with Birkot Kriyat Shema. And of course, we know you cannot stop in the middle of Birkot Kriyat Shema. It's asur to speak. And hence, it would be asur to do it even for Sorchet Tzibur as well. Now, the Kaf HaChaim says that if a person is not davening right now, even though that you're not in the middle of tefillah, so you say, well, I could make the hachraza, I could make the announcement, people are davening, and they're going to stop to listen to what I have to say, but I, who am making the announcement, I'm not davening. I've davened nets already before, or I'm davening later. Says the Kaf HaChaim, even he should not make the hachraza between Baruchu and Yotzer, because even though that the tzibur is not going to be saying anything, they're not mafsik b'dibur, but the very fact of stopping, pausing in the middle, even though that's with shtika, it would be considered a hefsek, and it's not a proper thing to be done. Now, Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef goes as far as saying, in one of the pieces in Yaakov Yosef, which is debatable, the reasons behind it in the footnotes, but he says even drinking in the middle of tefillah, in the middle of Baruch Shamar and on, or in the middle of Yotzer, it would be considered a hefsek because it's an action of stopping the tefillah and drinking. You're not saying the bracha, you said the bracha before Baruch Shamar. But even that, he goes as far as saying that even that is not a proper conduct because of that little hefsek that you're making in the middle of tefillah. Again, as we mentioned, there are others who do not necessarily agree with that, but nevertheless, in our case, at least, the Kaf HaChaim says, even though that they are not talking, the very fact that they stop their tefillah, pause to listen to the announcement, that by itself hijacks their mind, so to speak, from the tefillah, and that's considered a hefsek b'shtika, which is not an appropriate thing to be done, and hence it should not be done. Now, next Siman Nun Het, really starts the halachot of Kriyat Shema, right? If you want to remember it, the halachot of Kriyat Shema starts from Siman Nun Het, Noach, right? And it goes until Siman Pehet, Pah, right? If you know the halachot of Kriyat Shema, Noach, it's beautiful. It's Hen also. If not, Pah means a pit. You have to. That's how you always remember the 30 simanim that you have for the halachot of Kriyat Shema. So we're going to start now the halachot of Shema. Seif Aleph Maran writes, and this is from the Gemara that we have had in Masechet Brachot Daf Tet Amud Bet. The Gemara says that Zman Kriyat Shema shel Shacharit Meshireh Havero Aragil Imo Ketzat Brichut Arba Amud, says Maran. The time of Shema starts from the time that you have enough natural light that you could recognize a friend of yours, which is not a best friend, is someone that you know them a little bit, and you could recognize that it's them from being 6 feet away. Arba amot, it's about 6 feet. That is the distance in which you would recognize in natural light who this person is when you know them a little bit, not too much. I mean, if you know someone very well, you can see them walk, and the way they walk and the way they carry themselves, say, oh, this is Peloni Almoni, right? But someone that you know a little bit, then you need them to be closer, and you need a certain level of light to know them. That light is the time for Shema. And in other words, the amount of light in every place in the world is the determining factor of night and day. The night and day really is determined by how much light you have in the sky. And therefore, by the way, the minutes, you say, Rabbeinu Tam is 72 minutes after Shkia. Not correct, depends where you are. Really, it has to be with degrees, right? Let's say, if you say, you go through the sugyot of the Gemara in Pesachim, in other places that discuss the Zmanim, Masechet Shabbat, Masechet Pesachim, other Masechtot, then you realize that they're talking about Eretz Yisrael in the equinoxes, right? When the day and night are equal, the two seasonal equinoxes that you have. So then you could say, fine. So if you have 13 and a half minutes, for instance, in the Shita of the Geonim, after Shkia, that would be considered Seta Kochavim, and the between Shkia and that is Berash Mashot. So if that's Seta Kochavim, you have to see how many degrees is the sun below the horizon, because that is the only determining factor, basically, of how much light you have in the sky, and apply that to anywhere in the world, and you would be good to go. In other words, if you have, let's say, I don't want to give degrees, but for instance, one of the big ones in Seta Kochavim would be 16.1 degrees below the horizon. If the sun, the angle of sun to the horizon of Earth would be 16.1 degrees below the horizon, that you could apply to anywhere in the world, and that would be the level of darkness or light in the sky that you would want for it to be the halachic status that you're looking for. So now, in some places, that may be 13 and a half minutes after Shkia. In some other places, well, 16 would not be that, it will be more. In some places, let's just give it numbers. It could be 50 minutes after Shkia. In some places, it could be 70 or 80 or 90 minutes after Shkia, depending on where you are on Earth, right? Depending on the axle of Earth being on the slant, position against the sun, and also depending on the season that you are, if you're in summer or in winter in the northern hemisphere, or the opposite of that in southern hemisphere, that makes all the difference, because the angles don't change as much when you're more on the slant. And if what I just said doesn't make sense to you, don't worry about it. It's just, it is a little bit complicated, but that is the level. That's why what Maran says, what the Gemara really says, is the determination of the time with a level of light. I said all of this to explain why we're giving such a strange thing, because it all depends on how much light you have, in natural light you have on Earth. So if you have enough light that you would recognize a friend, not a close friend, but a friend of yours, richuk of arba amot, that would be the time for Shema. V'nimshach zmana, so that's the beginning of the zman of Shema, and nimshach zmana at sof shalosh shaot shehu reviyah hayom, and the time of it is extended until end of 3 hours, which is a quarter of the day. Okay? U'mitzvah min hamuvchar likrotah kevatikin, and it's mitzvah min hamuvchar, says Maran, to read Shema kevatikin. What does kevatikin mean? Vatikim, Rashi says on Gemara that we learned together, is the Talmidim, and Rashi says they're anashim anavim umechabebim mitzvot, humble people who love mitzvot and they want to do it in the first moment that you could do it. According to Rabbi Yashiv, this is actually the mitzvah, according to Rambam, but this is the mitzvah. Anything after this would be b'di'evet. So Rabbi Yashiv had a question. This is printed in the She'elot u'Tshuvot that they put together for Rabbi Yashiv. He never published a sefer of Tshuvot, but they did it for him from the different Tshuvot that he had written in the years. So in the first volume, it's called Kovetz Tshuvot. If you have a scenario in which a person has an option of davening b'yahid b'netz versus b'tzibur after netz. So this was printed in his Tshuvot in Chelek Aleph. I believe it's in Siman Tetvav, if I'm not mistaken. And he brings the Mishna Berurah. Mishna Berurah says, Chafetz Chaim says, if you're a netz guy, right? If you're a person that's always davening with netz hachama, and now one day you're on a trip, you're in a different country, different city, wherever it may be, and you don't have a minyan of netz. You have a regular minyan. So do you daven b'yahid with netz, or do you daven b'tzibur after netz? Right? So says the Chafetz Chaim, if you're a netz guy, that you're always careful with davening with netz, you are allowed to daven with netz b'yahid versus doing b'tzibur afterwards. Which indicates, this is in Berurah, which indicates that if you are not a netz guy, better daven b'tzibur afterwards, right? Now, by the way, tomorrow in the Gemara, in Avod Yomi, we're going to learn about a famous Gemara of a person letting their Eved go in order to make a minyan. How important it is to actually be a part of minyan, daven b'minyan, and not miss it. It's tremendous. Moshe Feinstein holds it's a full-fledged Mishnah Rabbanan, and it's asur to daven b'yachid. But nevertheless, that's what Chafetz Chaim says. Rabbi Yashiv disagrees with the Chafetz Chaim. He says, first of all, if tefillah b'netz would be actually more important than tefillah b'tzibur, you don't need to be a netz guy. Even if once in your lifetime you have the opportunity of davening with netz, b'yahid, versus davening b'tzibur, the halacha should still be daven with netz. Why do I have to be a netz guy? These are abstract concepts. If davening b'netz is more important, then it's more important, regardless of if you're a netz guy or you're not a netz guy. So that's first of all. Then he brings a proof from the Mishnah in Masechet Brachot, without getting into too much detail. We've done the Mishnah already, that the main thing of davening with netz is saying the Shema right before netz hachama or by netz hachama, depending on how you learn, not the tefillah part of it. So says Rabbi Yashiv, therefore, I'll tell you what to do. You get up early in the morning, you say Shema with netz hachama, and then go like a mensch and daven with the tzibur afterwards. This way you get both of them, right? This happens to be a question that many people will have. Let's say they say, I have a chavruta, but I have a good chavruta, but I only could make the chavruta if I miss davening with netz. Rabbi, I'm a netz guy, right? I want to daven with Netzach Hama, but then I can't learn with my Habruta, because my Habruta only could learn at 6 o'clock. Or I have a Chabura, like Amud Yomi at 6 o'clock, but I have a Netz guy. So I have a conflict between coming to Shiur or going with the Habruta versus davening Benetz. What do I do? So according to this Rabbi Yashiv, what you do would be say Shema with Netz and daven afterwards, and that would be perhaps, again, this is a leap a little bit because there you're davening, the option is davening without Sibur. Here you have the option of davening with Sibur with Netz versus you're learning. So it is a leap that we're taking, but that simply put, that would be an etzah, that would be an idea that a person could do in that scenario. But nevertheless, Maran writes, mitzvah min hamuvchar likrota kevatikin. It's mitzvah min hamuvchar to read Kriyat Shema, to say it with Netz. שהיו מכוונים לקרותה מעט קודם הנץ החמה, that they were careful to say Shema right before Netz HaChama. By the way, what's Netz HaChama? Anyone? We have like 100 people here. Like, what's the Netz HaChama is when the sun comes out of, from below horizon comes up. But it's not so pashut what Netz HaChama is. There are at least 3 different shitot what Netz HaChama is. There are some who say when it's the sun is seen above the mountains, right? Coming up, and you can see it there, which could be like even up to 10 minutes after the actual Netz. Or you could say, even in a simple horizon, which you have, let's imagine if you live in the East Coast and you see the sun literally coming up from the horizon of the sea, the water, there's nothing there. So even there is not so pashut. This machloket is it when the top of the ball of sun hitting the horizon and you see the first light of sun coming out, or is it when the entire ball of sun is out above the horizon, which would be 2.5 minutes, 2 minutes and 40 seconds about after you see the first, edge of the sun coming out of the horizon. And that's not so simple. So what do you do when there's a machloket like this? The Netz that says over there is the Netz that the top of the sun, at the top edge of the sun hitting the horizon, right? And by the way, even that's not so accurate because the way internationally the hours are divided, you have the entire globe of Earth, which is divided to 360 degrees of a circle, right? So 360 divided by 24 is what? The math genius is here, right? Yalla. Okay, back to school, everyone, right? So you divide that, if you have, it's about 15 degrees, right? So you have every 15 degrees on the globe of Earth has 1 hour. And internationally, that's how they have set it up. You pass the degree, you pass 1 hour. But within this 15 degrees of Earth is all 1 hour, internationally set up. But they're not real hours because the beginning and the end of that distance on Earth, they are 1 hour apart from each other, and they both have the same hour. So even after atomic clocks and all that, you have certain boundaries for how exact it is. So you could be a few minutes off when they tell you Netz HaChama is this. So that's also, you have to take it in consideration, which we're not discussing right now. For Molad of the thing also it makes a difference for Molad of Levana and so on. So, but put that aside, the Sherot Tshuvot Ish Matzliach writes, I think it's also in Siman Tetvav, if I'm not mistaken, in the Har Matzliach Mazuz's Sefer, and he writes that it's better to go with the later time. That means wait until the entire ball of sun is out above the horizon, and then you say it because let's evaluate this. The evaluation of this would be davening before Netzach Hama is b'di'evet. You're only yotze b'di'evet if you daven before Netzach Hama. But if you daven after Netzach Hama, it may not be mitzvah bin hamufchar. It may not be the best way of doing the mitzvah, but it's fine. So if I have a machloket, if I have safek when Netzach Hama is, I would rather do the later one than take a chance that my tefillah should be b'di'evet. Therefore, it says later. So that's something to just be mindful, which affects really is halachot of tefillah, but it affects our halacha of saying Shema right prior to Netz as well. And says Maran, we're just going to finish reading the language of Maran, and then tomorrow we'll get to the explanation and the mefarashim on the Shulchan Aruch. In a way that you finish Kriyat Shema and the brachot after it with Netzach Hama, and you right away start your tefillah with Netzach Hama, a person that could do this, his schar is tremendous. And says the Ramah, Shiura Netzach Hama hu kemo. When is Netzach Hama? Says the Ramah, the shiur of Netzach Hama is kemo shiur sha'a achar kodem she'aleh kol guf hashemesh al haaretz. The time of Netz is about an hour before the sun is all up above the earth. And we have to, of course, explain what does this exactly mean. This is from the Haggadah Maimonides, and Bezat Hashem will discuss this in the days to come.